Hello, everyone. Welcome to King Po Myers, and welcome to our special segment, King Po Myers True Crime. This is it. This
Yeah,
is
we're on our
our
last two episodes.
our last two episodes, but this is what we're doing, giving you a two-parter because Sammy has so many notes, just
I
pages and pages and pages of notes.
so many. I'm so sorry, but I promise it's necessary.
Oh, I have no doubt about that. And of course, welcome back, Sammy. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm very excited to tell you this case. I'm so excited, and I'm excited to tell you about the stuff that we talked about in the last case about the Chicago Tylenol murders. Because at the end of that episode, we were talking about. I kind of had like this strange revelation where I was like, well, what if the collective consciousness of like society as a whole kind of shifted after this particular incident? And that was where it came from, that people always go and reach towards the back of of different products and stuff at a grocery store. And I spoke to my grandparents today, because I spoke to my parents who were born in 69 and 70, and they, of course, this happened in 82. So they would have been teenagers. So it's kind of foggy, but my grandparents were already adults. They were already parents at that time. So of course they clearly remembered it. Like, they were very aware of it. I didn't even have to say much. They knew exactly what I was talking about, which is weird because my grandparents are not true crime buffs at all.
Okay.
But they remembered it very, very clearly. And she said, my grandmother basically said that before that happened, it was all about, I guess, freshness. So, because most people, when they stock grocery store things, it's all about like the closest date to you, like the things that are going to expire quicker are going to be in front. And so if you reach towards the back, you're going to get something that lasts longer,
Yeah.
basically.
Okay.
But after the Chicago Tylenol murders, my grandmother was incredibly paranoid. The paranoia of it like boosted a little bit more. Before it was more about freshness, and after it was more about paranoia and tampering with it. So she actually completely stopped buying Tylenol for a very long time.
Wow.
Completely, like any products regarding Tylenol. She really kind of stopped buying pills unless it was like prescribed. So I don't think they use painkillers for a while. That's from what she told me. And she was because I think it wasn't immediate, but it was shortly after that the FDA then did the tamper-proof sealing. It
Yep.
wasn't immediate. So as soon as they did that, she felt more comfortable doing that again. But they clearly remember it. And something similar that I was excuse the lawnmower outside.
No worries.
Because of course it has to be now.
Yes.
Another case that I had heard about a long time ago, it also kind of like correlates to this, was the case of Ronald Clark O'Brien, otherwise known as the Candyman, or the man who killed Halloween. I'm just gonna have to be louder than this lawnmower, aren't I? He basically he was the one that laced pixie sticks with cyanide and pixie sticks, yeah. And
Jesus.
ended up killing his 8-year-old son and poisoned his daughter and 3 other children in an attempt to cover it up. So
What
that
the heck?
is where, and this was in 1974, so this was before Chicago Tylenol killings. But they were close enough that my parents were born in 70 and 69, so they were kids when they were going trick-or-treating when this happened. So after this happened, my grandparents, my grandma's a little cuckoo, but I love her to death. No, she was paranoid, as any parent would be. And even though this happened in Texas, it still freaked her out. So
Yeah.
for a really long time, she was very careful. Like, that's where it comes from, that like parents look for like puncture marks and injection marks. And that's another thing she mentioned as well, with in reference to the Chicago Tylenol murders and everything, even when, because my grandparents volunteer at food banks and stuff like that, and they do like St. Vincent de Paul, etc. And so when they're looking at food cans and stuff like that, the first thing they have to toss it if it even looks remotely punctured or dented at all. So don't donate canned food that's dented at all, because they will toss it. Your food will not get to people. Just as a side note. But my grandma actually was to the point where any Halloween candy that my dad and my aunt brought back, they would basically like have a whole bag of candy themselves that they had already checked and would replace it all completely. So they wouldn't let, and even then they were selective of what houses they went to. They only went to houses where they knew the neighbors, apparently. So it really freaked her out.
Scary times.
Yeah, super crazy. And I mean, like, everyone always talks about like, oh, the summer of 69, etc., and all that stuff. Well, all of that was like literally the era of serial killers. So like that entire like late 60s to mid 80s was like serial killer central. And I don't know why, but it was. So but we
It's
will
also
still
an
be talking about
outstanding
poisoning
song, though.
today. Oh, the summer 69. Yeah.
Summer 69.
Yeah.
Good jam.
But we are still going to be talking about poison in this particular case. So I'm very proud of my notes on this one. I did 16 pages of notes in 10-point font, which should be illegal. But I needed it to fit in the document, and it was hurting my eyes. I literally I was seeing things last night finishing it. I I was like towards like the tail end of this case on part 2, and I like blinked for a second, and I swear to you I saw like pink, purple, and blue like clouds dart across my screen, like it was like one of those beautiful like very like soft pastel-y like paintings of the night sky. I saw clouds.
And
And
that's when you need to take a nap.
apparently shortly after, I was also slurring my words because my boyfriend called me. He's like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "What? I completely fine. Why?" She's like, "You were just slurring your words." I'm like, I sounded completely coherent from my ears. So I worked very hard on these notes, irregardless.
We are very excited. This case in particular, I don't know much about it, but I got a basic synopsis of it before we knew what cases we were gonna do, and I had this as my number 1. I'm like, all right, week 1, baby, and I was then told, no, this is the finale because this has so much, and we have to build up to this.
It's actually a lot.
I've been so excited to talk about this case because it's so fucked up. It's so batshit crazy.
Yeah. For the record, the only synopsis he got was, you know what? I'm not gonna say it. I'll say it at the end of what your synopsis was, what all you knew about this case was at the end. Okay. So
tell us the tale, Sammy.
This is the story about the F Street landlady murderer, Miss Dorothea Puente. And this is actually like a semi-local case for me, which I did not know. I think I had heard this case like a while back in the past, and I had like assumed it had happened like somewhere in like England or something, because boarding houses aren't really a thing here.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was like in some foreign European area. This happened in Sacramento, California. So I was very surprised to hear that. So we're going to start with some background on Miss Dorothea. Dorothea Helen Puente was born on January 9th, 1929 in Redlands, California. She was the 6th of 7 siblings, which is a fucking lot.
Normal back then, though.
I guess. I mean,
my grandfather,
say 5.
My grandfather was out of 9.
Oh, wow. Yeah, maybe, I don't know. I don't My boyfriend is the youngest of 7, so but that's like all that's all
Hmm.
stepchildren and stuff like that. So this is all the same person, which is like, I don't know why you would want to give birth that many times, but okay. Her parents, funny enough, the mother's name was Trudy,
Of course.
which is kind of crazy. And her father, Jesse, they were both abusive alcoholics. Oh, I should probably give you guys some trigger warnings here. There is some mention of physical abuse, um, alcoholism, drugs, sex work, etc. Um, I mean, but this is also a murder story, so you should expect the worst.
Mm.
um,
Especially on a finale.
yeah. Both of the parents, they made their money working in a cotton field, but they didn't make enough money for their large family. And so in the evenings, the mother would do sex work for a little extra money.
Oh.
Uh, yeah. So the mom would often bring her clients back to the house. So all of her young children are just seeing this revolving door of men coming back and forth and like hearing things like that small children do not need to hear. And sometimes her mom would like leave on like days at a time to go see clients, and on these trips she'd be like partying, she would come back completely blasted, just totally messed up, and she would leave the kids with her husband Jesse, who was also an abusive alcoholic. So if even if she brought them along, it wouldn't have been a good time. um so Dorothea was the very youngest. She really couldn't look after herself. And because of this, when her mother would go on these trips, she used to just lock her and her older brother like in a closet with some food and just leave them there until she
Oh.
came back. Like yeah, it's messed up. Messed up.
And this
But
is how a
Jesse,
killer is born.
yeah, I mean, like really rough beginnings. Just they always are. So Jesse, Dorothea's father, was always too drunk to care for them, and when he wasn't passed out, he was physically abusive. He was also like he was wrought with depression. And he did survive a suicide attempt at some point, but in 1987, he ended up passing away not long after that from tuberculosis. And then a year after that, Dorothea's mother, Trudy, also passed away in a motorcycle accident. So when she was just 9 years old, she was just sent to like various like foster homes and whatnot and super like distant relatives. And she would just be gone from like home to home to home. Like it was never stable. Um, it was a super unstable childhood. And she could never make friends in one area because she would just be moved everywhere.
Mhm.
And like in some of the things that I've read, there were some mention of sexual abuse at some of these homes, but not enough that I can confirm. It was just mentioned in 1 or 2 articles that I read. She finally, when she was, I think she was still a child at this point, but at some point she settled in Fresno, California with some relatives. And once she grew up and became an adult, she would get into conversations with people about her childhood. And she would just straight up lie about it. And whether that be out of embarrassment or wanting to sound more exciting or interesting, she would always make up like a different background story for herself that just was not true at
Hmm.
all. Um, she would say that she was born and raised in Mexico. She would say that her parents abandoned her and that she was picked up by some rando and raised by them. And sometimes she would tell people that she had 18 siblings, of only 14 of which reached adulthood, which is just weird. You already come from a large family. You don't need to double that number.
Mm.
Um, and then in 1945, when Dorothea was 16 years old, she married a 22-year-old army man named Fred McFall. Fred had just returned from the Pacific Theater of World War II, and she was 6 years younger than him, and he was basically able to groom her into this relationship, which just sucks. I mean, she's looking for anything at this point, like any form or semblance of stability. Um, and then at this point in her life, she was living in Washington, so like a completely different state. She was going by the name Sherry, and she would earn her money through sex work. And apparently, this is what attracted her husband to her. Um, Dorothea and Fred had 2 children together, 2 daughters, and she didn't keep either of them. One of them was put up for adoption really, really quick, and then the other one was sent to live with her relatives in Sacramento. She was actually pregnant a third time really, really quickly after the second one in 1948, but she suffered a miscarriage, and Fred was like, I don't know if I want this anymore. You had a miscarriage. I'm gone. Bye. So he left. So Dorothea and Fred got a divorce. But just like with her childhood, she had a cover story for it that she would tell people. She would tell people that Fred passed away from a heart attack, that they didn't get divorced, and that he just passed away from a heart attack. And like the lies she would tell were either ones that would get her like a lot of sympathy, or like just to make her seem more interesting. She would tell people that she was an actress or a singer or a celebrity. She would lie about like famous connections and tell people she had a lot of famous friends and links to the royal family. And then after Fred left, then Dorothea began turning to alcohol. She was still doing sex work as her job, but it wasn't paying enough and she wanted more. And so at this point, she starts committing petty crimes. She would forge fake checks, steal things from different stores. And one day when she was 19 years old, 19, it's insane to me. She was in one particular shop and she was forging this check to pay for things with. And the store clerk was getting a little suspicious of her. They called the police without her knowing. And the clerk behind the desk had to basically stall Dorothea and keep her in the store until police got there. And because of him stalling, I think Dorothea kind of caught on to it. And she started getting suspicious and knowing that the police would come. So instead, she fucking bounced. So she ran out of the store and hopped on the first bus she saw. But police had already arrived at this point and watched her get on the bus and knew exactly where she was going. So they were on the other side when she got off the bus. Police arrested her, and she was sentenced to 1 year in prison for that fraudulent check. And as part of her trial, she had to have a psychiatric assessment to determine why she did this. She has several psychiatric assessments over the course of this. The psychiatrist, yeah, I mean, yeah, for a year for a forged check.
Don't be forging checks, people, but I think a year is a bit excessive.
Oh, I think that's like, I don't know. Some people don't even get that, but I think it's because she ran. Because if I've never heard of anyone. No, I take that back. It's mostly people that have done like multiple forged checks though.
Yeah.
This was only one instance. So that's why I'm like curious that seems like a little large, but I think it's because she ran. I can't imagine that they would give you a year if you did one forged check, So, the psychiatrist that assessed her basically said that she did this because she had low self-esteem due to her childhood and her divorce and everything. And that like she found like happiness and like basically stealing things and doing these things was like giving her like this serotonin boost.
Yep.
So, and it would make her feel better about herself because she would steal like clothing and stuff like that. And they determined that she would probably be a repeat offender if she didn't have some kind of rehabilitation or counseling to help her self-esteem so that she wouldn't have to find it in outside sources like clothes. However, as we know our system, that never happens. So she only served 4 months of her 1 year sentence. So after her release from jail, Dorothea was put on probation for a year. And not long into that, she decided she was going to run away. So when you're on probation, you have to basically like report your whereabouts to your probation officer
Mm-hmm.
whenever you leave. And like basically like if you are moving, you have to report it so that they know where to find you. But she decided she was going to run. So she just physically up and left and no one knew where the hell she'd went. So her probation officer had to report her as missing. I don't know if he even bothered to look. But now she was a criminal for violating her probation. The police began an official search for her. There was a warrant out for her arrest. They were asking for leads. They were following every single one, but everything came up short. And eventually they just gave up, which is kind of crazy. But at the same time, this is over a forged check. So she's not like, they're not worried. I mean, meanwhile, she had moved to San Francisco, heyo, and continued to support herself there with sex work. In 1952, she was going by the alias Taya when she met and married a Swedish man named Alex Johannesson. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Johansson. Once
Johan?
again, Johansson.
Johansson.
But again, she told this guy so many lies. And they are bizarre lies. Like, it's so bizarre. She told him that she was Muslim, that she was mixed African and Asian descent. This is a white woman, by the way. He was a fisherman and he had long periods of time on these fishing trips, so he never actually realized that she was a sex worker. He wasn't there enough to really notice that what her patterns were, but he started to get a little bit suspicious after his trip slowed down in the winter. Dorothea knew that Alex wouldn't like her being a sex worker, so instead she decided to change her job, but not entirely.
Okay.
Your girl opened a brothel.
Okay.
So she decided she was going to run a brothel because that way she wouldn't take clients herself, but she would be managing other sex workers that she hired out of the building. She had told the landlord that she was renting it and that she was going to be opening like some kind of book club or library. And after a while, the landlord of this building that she rented was getting suspicious of what was actually going on down there because there were just too many people coming and going, and so he called police, and police decided to go undercover as clients to the brothel. And Dorothea was arrested yet again and was sentenced to 90 days in prison.
Illegally running a brothel, 90 days. Forged a check, 1 year.
Yeah,
in a house of
I don't
corrections.
know about you, but I think one is more severe than the other.
Yeah. 90 days. Don't you do it again.
Yeah. So following her release from jail after 90 days, she and her husband Alex began arguing a lot, and the arguments were getting so bad that the husband actually got her admitted to a psychiatric ward. And the diagnosis given to her in the psychiatric ward was that she was a liar with an unstable personality that required antipsychotic medication, which isn't really a diagnosis of anything. You don't really prescribe antipsychotics unless you have a diagnosed like actual mental health disorder.
A liar. You, ma'am, are a liar.
A liar with an unstable personality. I mean,
okay, so what year was this?
This was in 1952.
Okay, so
maybe like late 1950s, early 1960s, because we then quickly jumped to 1966.
What that is the I'm just trying to like take what they knew in the 1950s and apply it to now, like what were they trying to say? You're a liar with an unstable personality.
I mean, she was a pathological liar. Like she really was.
Yeah.
She lied about everything, even shit that she didn't need to lie about. There was no reason to. Um and with an unstable personality, I think that
Dissociative
might
personality.
it might just be because she's an alcoholic. I mean, she's still an alcoholic at this point. Um so that could just be what that is. And they misdiagnosed her because I mean, mental health was not it's sad. It's really sad just how much flew under the radar back then.
Yep.
So then in 1966, when she was 36 years old, Alex divorced her. It was a mixture of anger, her behavior, and lack of motivation. Apparently, she was super fucking lazy. And not long after this, literally in the same year, she married again to a man that was over 20 years younger than her, named Roberto Puente, which is where she got the name Dorothea Puente.
Cradle robber.
I'm sorry?
Cradle robber.
Yeah. So he was 16. She was 36.
Oh my.
Here is where things start to go downhill. as if it wasn't already. I mean, we started pretty low, but we're tumbling down to hell soon. It was at this point that she decided that she was going to leave sex work for good. She hadn't been taking her own clients for a while, and she just decided she didn't want to run this brothel anymore. So she was like, girls, go back to the streets. She found out that she could make an honest living working as a nurse's aide in private homes. She was not a nurse because she did not have the qualifications to be one, but she would work with elderly people, disabled people, people with kind of things that meant they couldn't care for themselves properly. And she would work with a lot of alcoholics, and her job was basically just to make sure that they paid their bills, make sure they've eaten, keep them out of trouble, make sure they're like washing, all those kinds of things, which you don't need qualifications to do, because there's nothing medical really going on there. Her marriage to Roberto only lasted 2 years. A lot of people that were friends with Dorothea at that time think that Roberto was only with her to get US citizenship, which is just sad. I mean, the relationship happened super fast. They had nothing in common. Huge age gap, fell apart super fast. Now she has no husband. She decided to build on her career. And a lot like the sex work thing, she knew that she could probably make more money if she was managing all the people doing that rather than doing the job herself. So in 1974, after Dorothea owned and ran this business for many years. What? Oh no.
What?
Oh no. Did I skip? Oh no, my notes.
What?
I missed a paragraph in my notes. Where are my notes? No. Oh, hold on. I did all of these notes in a separate document so that way I could copy and paste it into our podcast doc, just so that I wasn't like in like a shared doc while I was doing this so that you couldn't see what I was doing. Oh, sorry. Okay, here we go. So 1968, I was like gonna say like that is a very large jump from 1966. Okay, 1968. She was 39 years old. She set about buying her own private home. She found a property on F Street in Sacramento, California, 2100 F Street. Had 3 stories, 16 bedrooms, perfect. It was exactly what she wanted. She set up her own boarding house / care home, basically, for anyone who needed somewhere to stay and be cared for. Meant like old people, people with disabilities, all that stuff. She would also take like a lot of criminals that like had maybe issues that were like either alcoholics or drug addicts, because a lot of people wouldn't typically take those people. And most care homes wouldn't take them. So Dorothea would. Mind you, she still did not have any qualifications in medicine, but she technically didn't need them for this job, even though she was dispensing their medication. She was in charge of what they had, how much they had, at what time they had it, which sounds really dangerous because of her lack of qualifications. I mean, you could easily OD somebody like that. She wasn't really allowed to take on patients that had super complex needs. So it wasn't like ever that she could get herself into a situation that she didn't know how to care for a patient. A lot of them would just be like, follow the instructions on the bottle.
Okay.
But like if it were like, like somebody with like diabetes or something, or like diabetes with a comorbidity, like of like if they had like colon cancer or something, she wouldn't be able to take on a patient like that.
Yeah.
So the top floor of this house, Dorothea saved completely for herself. She had a bedroom, she had a full living quarters, office. She had this office, she would actually hang up a ton of fake diplomas. Because this wasn't like a professional home, they had to have a professional come in like once a month to check and see how everything was going, and that those were just to make her look good and look official, and like she knew what she was doing. She also had just like a bunch of drawers and cabinets just full of medical stuff that she was not qualified to use, like syringes, but she had them there anyway. And so on then the ground floor and the basement is where the tenants would stay. The tenants on the ground floor, so in the middle, the middle of it, they would have their own room each with built-in bathrooms. They had a single bed and a TV and any other items they wanted to bring in, but that was what they were provided with. That was for higher income tenants, so people willing to pay a little bit more. But the lower income tenants would be in the basement, and they did not have their own rooms. It was actually like just one huge, like imagine literally like a garage with like a bunch of like single beds all in it, all separated by curtains like a hospital ward.
Sketchy.
Like that. Very sketchy. But I mean, if you're low income and nobody else is going to take you, I mean, that's your best option, you know? Every time she would move a tenant into the boarding house, one of the rules to stay there was that they had to sign over all of their benefit checks to Dorothea. Because a lot of them were, a lot of them were unable to work because they had to be either in a care home. Some of them would get benefits from the government to pay for their living. And Dorothea said that they basically had to transfer them all to her in order to pay for upkeep, and she would help them manage their money from there. Since a lot of them like were either like they were some were special needs, some were alcoholics, and they needed supervision with their money. And business was going well at first. Dorothea was still struggling with her alcoholism, but it wasn't getting in the way of her new business. She would kind of keep that part like for nighttime so that she would like spend the day downstairs with patients actually doing her job, and then she would just get absolutely blasted in her upstairs quarters later in the night. And she was earning more and more money with this and getting more and more social outside. And her reputation was very important to her. And as she was getting more money, she was spending more money on how she was perceived by people. So she used to go to like bars and stuff. She would pick up the entire tab, like stuff like that. She was just kind of like flaunting it and making sure her reputation was upheld, basically, as a nice, kind woman, so nobody would ask any questions. So so here we go. Now we're back to my notes. I just missed a paragraph. I don't know why that happened.
All good.
In 1974, after Dorothea after she owned and ran this business for a couple of years at this point, she decided to hire a groundskeeper, a young man named Pedro Montalvo. She took a liking to him, offered him his own room in the boarding house as part of his payment, which we all know was so that she could actually spend more time with him because she thought he was cute. So Dorothea started taking him on her lavish nights out, where she would basically pay for everything, and these nights would always end up back in her bedroom, and over time they kind of liked each other. And as with all of her other relationships, this one was also built on lies.
Of course.
She told Pedro that she was originally from Mexico, just like he was, but of course she wasn't. She told him that she was a professional doctor and had all the qualifications, and she did all of her studying in Mexico, which none of that is true. Dorothea and Pedro got married, making him her fourth husband when she was 45 years old. And just like her last one, Pedro was a lot younger than she was. And just like her other marriages, this one fell apart super fast as well. He quickly became very aware of her dark side, specifically the dark side of her business. And he suspected her of stealing from her tenants, not only their checks that they were getting every month, but also physically like stealing their possessions, like jewelry and stuff that the family would bring them. She was doing all of that. She absolutely was. And she was doing way more than that as well. She was going out to these bars without Pedro, and she would rob people. Either way.
What the hell?
Yeah, basically, Pedro just realized a lot of things that were going on and that he was really kind of didn't know at the beginning, and he didn't want to be in this marriage anymore.
Wait, you don't speak Spanish?
She actually does, believe it or not. She does.
Oh my God.
Uh-huh. Believe it or not, she actually does speak Spanish. But either way, instead of bringing this up to her and being like, hey, I want a divorce, he just decided to bounce after a month of marriage. He just ran away.
1 month.
1 month. Yeah.
I don't need this.
Yeah. He figured that out real quick. So Dorothea continued to run her boarding house, and she really liked her job. That wasn't really a job. She was just stealing from all the other tenants, and that's how she was making the majority of her money. And funny enough, a lot of this money that she was stealing and doing other illegal activities, she would put back into the community, and she would like feed poor kids that were like outside of the boarding house and give them clothing, which of course is all for her public image. In the late 70s, Dorothea was finally caught for her illegal cashing of her tenant checks. This happened when one of the tenants at the boarding house was out one day, and they got arrested while they were out. They were taken back to police custody, and somehow, while they were in police custody, their checks were still getting signed for. Oh. So police decided to look further into it, and they were finding that all of the checks that were being delivered and assigned to different residents were all being signed by Dorothea, which is totally illegal.
Very.
They found that she'd done this to at least 40 or so other people, totaling over $4,000. She was arrested and given 5 years on probation, no jail time, probation, but only on the condition that she gave up the boarding house and she could not work at it in anything like that again. Once again, she had another psychiatric appointment, and this time she was diagnosed with unspecified schizophrenia. So they didn't know what kind. I guess she was showing kind of signs of a bunch of different types of schizophrenia, and they couldn't pin it down. So maybe the antipsychotics were a good idea if she was indeed schizophrenic, but we don't actually know that because, again, this is the late 70s. So we'll see. During this 5-year probation, Dorothea was allowed to move around, and she took this opportunity with open arms. She was moving all over California, picking up jobs everywhere, but none of them really stuck. She wanted nothing more than to have her care home back. She really, really enjoyed the boarding house, and she wanted to get it, and she was going to. She moved back to Sacramento in 1979, and she decided that the way she was going to get her foot back in the door was that she was going to be a carer for a family. But in order to do that, she knew she had to change up her look because she was going back to Sacramento. This is the exact same place that she is a known criminal. She just got arrested. She's on probation. So she had to change her look. So she made herself look intentionally older. She stopped dyeing her hair. She let it grow out, completely gray. She would dress older than her age, lie about her age. She had these huge, like, Coke bottle glasses. At this point, she was in her 50s, and she would tell people she was in her 60s. She was basically just trying to look the part of a little old lady. and it worked. She found a family on F Street in Sacramento, the exact same street where she once had this boarding house.
Oh.
They wanted her to be their kind of like live-in nanny almost, and like this family was called the Odorica family, and they were Mexican and Spanish speaking, and the reason that they chose Dorothea over anyone else was because she could also speak Spanish, and they wanted that in a nanny figure to kind of help the children learn. So she got super close to this family. Like she ended up, I guess, becoming like a godmother of one of the kids that they had. But as close as this family was to her, they did not need her full time. So she was only part time. So Dorothea went out looking for another part time job, and she eventually came across a company that didn't ask for criminal history, which is like actually really hard to come by, believe it or not. She went for that one, and the job that she was given was pretty much being a nurse's aide. She had done the job before. She knew what she needed to do. But instead of being in one place with all the tenants there, she would be going to each individual house instead. She was enjoying her job a lot until a lot of them expected that she might have been stealing from them. But she was really good at manipulation. And all of these people she was going to care for were vulnerable in some way or another. They were either old or disabled. And once Dorothea realized that she could get away with it, she was pretty good at talking her way out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So she's a very good liar. So here's where some medical crimes begin. Dorothea decided to step up her crimes, get more out of it. She had this one particular woman that she would care for named Esther. And Esther had pretty bad heart problems, but they were on the mend, so she didn't require as much care anymore. But Dorothea didn't want to lose Esther as a client because Esther was super freaking rich and she had a lot to steal. So Esther was doing really well in terms of her heart condition, and then suddenly it got like really bad again. So she was being rushed to the hospital every single week for irregular heartbeat and other things like that. Of course, the doctors always treated her, but they were really confused with the sudden decline. And it was until one social worker at the hospital pointed out the fact that Esther always seemed to be pretty sick in the days after Dorothea visited, and all the other doctors agreed that this was very suspicious. So to check on Esther, they decided they were going to go visit their house, like just cold knock, just cold visit, when Dorothea was there, just to observe the dynamic, what's going on. Doctors get there. Dorothea was very helpful. She was reassuring that Esther was getting all the medications that she needed. And Esther herself even told doctors that she was really glad Dorothea was there because she just really liked having her around. Then all of a sudden, after this doctor's visit, Esther stopped coming to the hospital. It was like her heart condition was miraculously cured. But doctors were like, I don't think so.
Nope.
So it wasn't long after that until that hospital received a call from doctors at another hospital saying that Esther had arrived at their hospital for these heart problems, and they just wanted to communicate with her old doctors just to kind of get a better idea of what she was going through. And like this hospital was like miles and miles away. So as soon as that doctor heard it, he was like, yeah, there's something going on there. So it was almost like Dorothea knew that these doctors were suspicious of her. So the first doctor advised the second doctor to have a look at Esther's toxicology reports. And when they got him back, there were high amounts of various different drugs in Esther's body, none of which were prescribed to her, all of which were prescribed to Dorothea. So doctors knew Dorothea had been drugging Esther, basically, just to keep her unwell enough that she needed someone to go and check on her and keep her safe,
Yeah.
just so that she could be stealing all of her possessions. So of course, when this came out, so of course they're going to tell Esther this. Esther fired Dorothea as her caretaker, and they all tried to take it to police. The doctors, Esther's family, they all went to police. However, nothing could be done There was no evidence that Dorothea actually gave those drugs to Esther, and Dorothea wasn't given so much as a slap on the wrist. So
That's insane.
Yeah. Oh man, here we go.
Was
Here's where it
Dorothea
gets.
just getting started?
Oh yeah. This is like not even. We're still at the base of the iceberg, my friend.
And if you look up a picture of Dorothea Puente,
Puente.
she is a little old lady.
Yeah, in her like pictures where she was being on trial for everything, she literally looks just like typical little old lady, gray curly hair, Coke bottle glasses, weird cardigan sweater, blouse, all that stuff. Yeah. So in 1982, Dorothea was 53 years old, and she was out at a bar one night when she met a significantly older man, 74-year-old Malcolm Mackenzie. And the two of them got drunk, and Malcolm suggested that Dorothea come back to his house that night.
For a
like
cup
a
of coffee.
74-year-old man hitting on a 53-year-old. So the two of them got in a cab and they went back to his house. But as they were going to get out of the cab, Malcolm realized he was a lot more drunk than he thought he was. He could barely even get out of the cab. He was stumbling all over the place, almost collapsing. Bear in mind, this was a 74-year-old man. And little old Dorothea had to pretty much carry him into the house. And on the surface, he was fine back at the club, enough to be flirting and dancing with Dorothea. So how he was so intoxicated as soon as they arrived there, he was very like, he was aware. It wasn't like, he felt like he was like, he knew he wasn't drunk. It wasn't like he was drunk, because when you're drunk, you aren't really thinking clearly. He was completely coherent, but his body wasn't working. So he kind of figured out what was happening when Dorothea led him to the couch, and he watched as she got up and began rummaging through all of his things. Dorothea had drugged this man so that she could go through this house and steal everything, basically. She got out a big red suitcase. She laid it on the floor, filling it with everything she could grab. She stuff from his drawers, just like anything that looked valuable. And right before she left, she went over to Malcolm, who was laid on the couch, still alert in his brain. He understood and knew everything that was going on. So he literally like watched her rob him. Walked over to him, which is like one of my worst nightmares. I've actually had horrible nightmares of like being conscious in my body and not being able to move. It is the worst kind of dream ever. She walked over to him, took up his hand, took his pinky ring off of his finger, and left his house. So he watched it happen, knew who she was, got her full name back at the bar. So as soon as he was alert again, he called police, who showed up at her doorstep 2 days later, and she was arrested. Court date was set for 3 months' time, and all she had to do for 3 months was just stay out of trouble.
Sammy?
Yeah?
Did Dorothea stay out of trouble?
Absolutely not. This is actually, it got worse.
Dorothea.
This is the first first actual victim. Of course, Dorothea, I mean, they were all victims, don't get me wrong. This one just is like, it's messed up because this is a friend. Dorothea couldn't stay out of trouble. So after she lost her job with Esther, she was worried about her career and how she was going to make money from now on. And that was when she had the idea to get the help of one of her friends. This friend was 61-year-old Ruth Monroe. Ruth's husband had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and she was really worried about what her life was going to look like once he passed away. And Dorothea saw this as an opportunity for them to help each other. Ruth needed a friend. Dorothea needed money. So Dorothea suggested to Ruth that the two of them should set up a catering company, almost entirely funded by Ruth. And that would give them something to do, new hobby, new career. Most of the initial funding, of course, came from Ruth because Dorothea didn't really have a lot of money, but she did swear that once the business was up and running, Ruth would see all of her money back and more. So they opened up a joint bank account. She convinced Ruth to open up a joint bank account with her. I mean, they're friends. Why wouldn't she?
Oh, Ruth.
And Ruth deposited $2,000 into it, which was their initial like Kickstarter fee. And the two of them got to planning. So in April of 1982, Ruth's husband was getting really, really ill and nearing the end of his life, and it was having a huge effect on Ruth and making her not very useful in the business because she's too busy crying over her dying husband to actually have fun with this catering business, of course. And you know, Dorothea couldn't have that. So to try and fix it, she invited Ruth to come and stay with her where she lived at the Odorica family's house, and hoped that this would cheer her up a little bit, being able to live with her friend. I don't know if I mentioned this. I had it in my brain. She lived on the top floor or middle floor, ground floor, maybe. She lived on one of the floors of the Odorica family's house. So she was a live-in nanny. So she had
Okay.
the another entire floor to herself. So Ruth and all of her children thought this was a really good idea, because Ruth really needed someone now that her husband was gone, and this was the perfect answer, her best friend. So all of her children actually helped her move in, and she was so happy. She was already settled in the house. And then her health seemed to take a sharp decline. When Ruth would meet up with friends, they noticed how spaced out she was, and all of her kids noticed the same thing. They had never seen their mom like this. Like, one of Ruth's daughters actually got really concerned when she went to the house to go and visit her mom and found her asleep on the couch in the middle of the day, and she was not the person to do midday naps. Her daughter sat Dorothea down and said, look, like, what's going on? Why is she ill? You live with her. Like, she's spaced out. She's tired. What's going on? So Dorothea explained, Ruth's very spaced out started to her daughter saying, I'm sorry. Clearly it was very late. She started off by saying Ruth had actually had a nervous breakdown earlier that day. And because Dorothea was such a good best friend to Ruth, she had taken her to the emergency room, and the doctors had given her a tranquilizer, like a sedative shot that made her really drowsy. This did seem very likely because Ruth was going through a lot, and her daughter believed exactly what Dorothea had told her and even thanked her for being such a good friend to her mom. A few days later, Dorothea got in contact with Ruth's children and told them that their mother was in a very bad way in terms of her physical health. And so her son, Bill, came over to check on her. And when he walked in the room, he saw his mother curled up in like a super tight ball, staring at a wall, unable to move, unable to speak. And this was like, he had never seen his mom like this before, obviously. I mean, I don't think I've seen my mom like that before. But he thought maybe it was like some kind of bad flu, since she didn't have any underlying health conditions that would be like super worrying. However, in the early hours of the next morning, Dorothea called all of Ruth's children and told them to get to the house as quickly as possible because Ruth had passed away. A coroner was called as well to come and collect the body. And at one point, Dorothea stood speaking to the coroner, and all of Ruth's children said that she believed that Ruth had taken too much of her medication, and that is what killed her. She didn't know if it was an accident or maybe that Ruth was intentionally trying to take her own life, but that's just what Dorothea thought that the cause was. Ruth's kids were not buying it. They were like, that is not my mom at all. Like, there's no way she would have killed herself. Like, they knew her mother better than anyone in the world, and she would not take her own life without telling anyone or discussing it. She was the kind of person that was very matter of fact. She was going to get all of her things in order, like make a will, like make sure she had everything, all of her assets in place. And they just knew that it wasn't even an option. Like, they were like, she did not kill herself, period. The coroner insisted that they have an autopsy on Ruth's body because no one was actually there when she passed away. There were no witnesses, and no one to say for sure what killed her. And when the results came back, it was confirmed that Ruth had passed away from a drug overdose, particularly Tylenol and codeine, neither of which had actually been prescribed to Ruth. Her cause of death was a drug overdose. However, the actual way that she overdosed on the drugs was not determined. So they couldn't tell if it was purposeful or not. One of Ruth's son-in-laws began voicing concerns about Dorothea because Ruth had been perfectly physically healthy before she went to go live with her, and now all of a sudden she's dead. He wasn't convinced it was a suicide either, or that they had just found some drugs and accidentally overdosed, and he wanted to do his own investigation. So he started looking through Ruth's medical records and everything, that like literally anything he could get his hands on, and he found that Ruth had never actually ever been seen by professionals like Dorothea said. Dorothea said that she had taken her to the hospital when she had a nervous breakdown and gave her tranquilizers, but that never happened. The son-in-law took this information to police and said, look, this looks weird. Can you look into it? Police said pretty much, yeah, that looks bad, but there's nothing we could really do because this is all circumstantial. There's nothing to prove that Dorothea gave those drugs to Ruth. And at this point, in the case, it had been 3 months since Dorothea had drugged and robbed Malcolm Mackenzie. So now her trial's coming up. So court day's coming up. Literally in a few days. Dorothea knew it wasn't looking good. She knew that she was probably going to go to prison. It was going to be for a long time too. So she needed to do something. So here's what Dorothea did. She went down to the bank, took out all of the $2,000 out of that joint bank account for the catering company. And with that money, she bought a plane to Mexico.
So she finally could say she went to Mexico.
She can finally say she went to Mexico. She bought a plane ticket to Mexico. After that, she took a trip to her friend's house. And at this point, it's like 11 a.m. The friend opened the door to Dorothea, like completely disheveled, bottles upon bottles of alcohol in her hand. She's like, yeah, I know it's early, but I'm stressed. Can we just drink? Like, I'm not even kidding. She gets to her friend's house at 11 o'clock in the morning. She's like, with all of these bottles of liquor, it's just like, yeah, I know this looks bad, but can we just sit down and talk? I'm real stressed. So the friend was like, yeah, I'll come on in. We'll have a couple drinks. This friend was actually Dorothy Osborne. So there's Dorothea and then there's Dorothy. So I'm just going to call her Osborne to prevent confusion. So Dorothea went straight to the kitchen. She was like, don't worry, I'll take care of it. I'll make the cocktails. And she made 2 glasses, brought them out to the living room where Osborne was sitting on the couch. She remembers taking a sip of this cocktail, and it was like the strongest cocktail she's ever tasted in her whole life. Like there were like 5 different kinds of liquor in it. And after she finished the cocktail, she actually needed another drink to kind of wash the taste out of her mouth. Like that's how strong it was. And the next thing she remembers is waking up on the floor 12 hours later, and Dorothea was gone. So she gets up and she's really confused and disoriented. And she's like, fuck, did I drink that much? Like, shit. So she starts like cleaning up her living room a little bit. She's grabbing all the glasses, taking them to the kitchen. And that's when she noticed some white powder on the side of the kitchen, inside of the kitchen that wasn't hers. So it must have been Dorothea's. She continues looking through her house and quickly notices that lots of stuff is missing. Loose change, checkbook, credit cards, debit cards. It was very clear to her that she had just been drugged and robbed by one of her closest friends. So she's just burning all her bridges, dude. So she called the police, of course, who came to her house, took the powder and what was left of the cocktails as evidence, and they began an official search for Dorothea. She was found 3 days later with a bunch of Osborne's belongings. She didn't even try to like sell them or get rid of them. She just had them. And apparently she didn't even try to flee to Mexico this time. I don't know. She pled guilty to, oh, I'm sorry. I skipped by accident. Police knew they couldn't just take her back home. They couldn't, she was a flight risk either way. So they put her in a holding cell, and the court date came around. And not only now was she on trial for the drugging and robbing of Malcolm Mackenzie, but also of her friend Dorothy Osborne. She pled guilty to all of the charges against her, and she was sentenced to 5 years in prison. So news broke in the town that this had happened, and Dorothea was arrested for it. And as soon as Ruth's children found out that it was basically confirmation that that's exactly what they had done to their mother. So they tried to reopen the case. Unfortunately, it was ruled that the mom's death had been a suicide, which was exactly the opposite of what her children wanted to happen. Dorothea Puente served just 3 years of her 5-year sentence. And it was then when she was finally free. But the worst of her crimes had yet to come. These will all seem like minimal in comparison to the 3-year-long murder spree that she was about to embark on at the age of 56. And that's the end of part 1.
Good God.
Mm-hmm.
Just drugging her friends and just stealing their shit.
Yeah. I mean, like, you do that to your friends. What are you going to do to strangers, you know?
We're going to find out in part 2.
Mm-hmm.
The sad one, though, was her friend Ruth.
Yeah, that one made me really sad because she, not only had she lost her husband, but she also like put money into this business that they were going to do. Like, she was so hopeful for this, and then she just got so betrayed. It's so messed up. So, yeah, it's really messed up. And like, I think she learned from this mistake of calling the coroner, because she does not do that again. I could tell you that.
Wow.
How are we doing on time?
We're doing good.
Doing good? Or
Doing good.
do you want me to tell a little bit more before we go on to part 2, or do you want to continue?
Yeah, we'll just leave it off of part 2. This is a good.
Okay, cool. All right. This is because that's how I had it separated out. So that was 6 pages of notes.
So yeah, part 1.
Yep.
Dorothea
Part
a bit
1.
Part 2.
Yeah. So I
Dorothea
promise
off the deep end.
all of this, I promise you, all of this is important for what is to come, because everything comes back into play. The checks, the court dates, the street, the family, Ruth, all of it comes back into play.
I'm not gonna lie to you, Sammy. I'm getting a bit stressed.
Yeah.
This is like insane.
Yeah. So you guys are gonna have to find out what comes next in part 2.
What do you think of Dorothea so far? I mean,
oh man, I don't know if I agree that she's schizophrenic. That's the thing I don't agree with, because I don't know. If she was schizophrenic, I feel like there would be other things happening that would compel her to this, but this is all solely greed. You know?
she's just so stupid about everything.
Yeah. I mean, she's a good liar, but she's not very bright when it comes to running from her problems.
Going to Mexico.
Time to go to Mexico. Gotta go. It's the classic, I'm catching a flight to Mexico. I wonder if that's where this came from.
A little old lady.
Little old lady fleeing to Mexico.
Are you okay, little lady? Cops are after me. Gotta go.
Yeah, gotta go. Bye. Can't stay here too long. Yeah. You know, it makes me wonder, like, did any other, like, because she did come from, like, a fairly large family, because I'm sure some of her siblings were still alive while she was the youngest. I'm sure some of her siblings are still alive while all this shit is happening. I wonder if any of those siblings saw this happening and was like, that's my batshit crazy sister. Like, you know, like, I wonder if she had ever tried to get in contact with them to try to, like, run or something, or if she even still had contact with them.
That's a really good point. Like,
yeah, I couldn't find any information.
Out?
I couldn't find any information on her family.
They probably just kicked her out. Like, you're the black sheep. Bye.
Yeah, I mean, she was also the youngest. I mean, like, who wants to be associated with the youngest sibling, you know? Like, if you're the oldest sibling, or like, you're coming from a family of 7, you know? I feel like those are complete polar opposites.
All right. So we're going to leave it off there. We will see you in the next episode for our grand finale and what Dorothy does. I really
I mean, you kind of already know what she does from the mini description that you read, and that's why you were so excited about it. But
Well, the fact that it was just a little old lady, I'm like,
yeah, she is 56 years old when she starts committing these crimes. Like not in this part. She's 56 years old starting episode 2. So starting part 2.
okay.
Yeah.
So we will see you all in part 2, where Sammy tells us the final chapter of Dorothea, and I don't know what's coming. Like, I know, but I don't
You
know.
know, but you don't. You
I
don't know how
don't.
bad it is.
Um, check out, check back with us, um, next week, or I'm sorry,
next week.
next week, where we find out. Thank you, Sammy, and we will see you all then.
Yeah. See you guys then.
Have a good one.
Bye.